Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Road to Success online masterclass. This is your host, Danny Khursigara, founder of FreedomOne International, executive coaching and business transformation. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whichever part of the world you're in right now. So as you know, the purpose of these masterclasses is to bring personal growth and transformation to your doorstep in a way that all facets of society can benefit from this invaluable information, which is shared by world-renowned experts on this platform. As many of you know, one of my goals is to impact 50,000 people in 5 years, which we're doing through our coachings, through our trainings, our live public events. But to add on a dimension where you get to listen to industry experts live twice a month is absolutely invaluable. Most of these experts would cost you around, hundreds and thousands of dollars for their time. So today I'm very excited to introduce a friend and a very special guest, Peter Sage. And the topic we're going to be talking about is success strategies in crisis, becoming your best self when life gives you its worst. So now I have known Peter for the past 4 years now and very familiar with his amazing work. When I decided to become an entrepreneur and an educator about, after leaving the banking industry 19 years ago, Peter's work at the Sage Business School was very helpful and very pivotal for me to develop an entrepreneurial mindset. But what really stood out for me about Peter was his relentless passion and his humility to create positive change in people. His #1 best-selling book, Inside Track, How to Turn Adversity to Your Advantage, is an amazing read and an inspirational true story. So Peter is a serial entrepreneur, a multiple #1 best-selling author, a philanthropist, an educator, a philosopher, an expert in human behavior, and a highly sought-after speaker who has spoken on 4 continents and shared the stage with the likes of Richard Branson, former US President Bill Clinton, and UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. He started, founded, and built over 20 companies, and some of his clients include several governments, members of royalty, Google, NASA, and the likes. Peter is named one of the greatest leaders and entrepreneurs of 2015 by Inspiring Leadership Now alongside Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg. Awarded the distinguished 2013 Brand Laureate Award from the Asian Pacific Brands Foundation for Extraordinary Individuals. Previous winners include Nelson Mandela, Steve Jobs, Hilary Clinton, and Tiger Woods. Peter is also an accomplished athlete, having completed several marathons and the formidable 18th Marathon des Sables, widely recognized as the toughest race in footrace in the world. He is renowned for giving practical and actionable advice and gets immediate results along with ideas and philosophy that are guaranteed to expand your mind. So it's a privilege and honor to welcome Peter Sage to our call. Peter, thank you so much for being here with us.
Danny, pleasure's absolutely mine. As you and I know, there's nothing more humbling than being able to or gracious than be able to have or accept people's time, especially when there's 1,000 things going on in everybody's lives at the minute, and to be able to not take that lightly and want to offer something of practical value for it in return. So I'm blessed we have everybody from different time zones around the world dialing in, and my outcome here, my intention is really to try to serve and be able to leave or have you leave this conversation empowered in a different way. Not motivated, that's different, that'll last 20 minutes, but actually be empowered, and I think we'll see the difference by the time we finish.
Absolutely, thank you. So the way this is going to work is that, Peter, I'll ask you a couple of questions, and for the listeners on the call, please, if you have a question, just type it on the chat box on the right-hand side, and I will raise that with Peter at the appropriate time. So let's get rolling. All right, Peter, so I think many people on the call don't know you very well. They've heard of you, but they would like to hear your story. And I know it's a very inspiring story. So could you give us a little bit brief background about yourself, about this relentless passion that you have? And I'm sure there's a lot of takeaways just from that story. So if you could just give us a brief overview of that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, Peter's story and brief rarely go together, but I'll try to keep it concise.
That's why I said brief.
Yeah. How many stories do you want? Well, I'll give you a very, very brief overview. My background, I'm not an academically educated guy. Yeah, I dropped out of school at 16. I've got no formal qualifications. I've got a PhD in results. That has sort of kept me going. And I remember when I left school, I worked for my dad for a short time. He owned a junkyard. He was kind of owned his own job. He had 2 staff members and me, and I was earning $40 a week. That was my wages back then. And I remember turning around to my dad and saying, Dad, I'm leaving at the end of the week, because my destiny was not to work in a junkyard. I knew that much. I wanted to be one of these things that I was so inspired by, one of these people called entrepreneurs. And yeah, I turned around and said, I'm leaving. He says, well, what are you getting into, son? And I said, well, I don't know, but I do know one thing. And it's a belief that I have, that I still have to this day, which is if you jump in the deep end, you can only swim. Yeah, people aren't fragile as fragile as we make out. Some of the times we are. And so, yeah, I left my dad and my last $40 for the week's wages. I paid my mum, or pounds at the time. I paid my mum $10 board, paid a friend £10 that I owed him, and I had £20 left. And I thought, okay, what do I do now? And I got into a business selling toys on flea markets and car boot sales, as we call them in England. Where you basically pull up in a car, open your trunk, and sell stuff in a field. And so as a result of that, I went into a wholesaler's. I blagged my way in, pretended I had all of these big, fancy sort of market stalls selling toys. I was 17, and I was telling the truth in advance. That's kind of how I justified it at the time. And anyway, I got my trade card, and I looked around. I bought 15 pounds of the toys. I drove to a flea market that Sunday in like a farmer's field. I wound the window down. I had a little Mini. The rule was I could drive any car in the junkyard that nobody else wanted to buy. And so I wound the window down. It only had 2 gears weren't working. I had to go from first and third, second and third gear, because it's a manual, stick shift wouldn't work. And I remember handing my last £5 through the window, wondering if I'd ever see it again. Wow. And I pulled up, and a lot of people had like little paste tables or what have you to put their goods on. I didn't. I couldn't afford one, and plus it wouldn't fit in the Mini. I had a Mini at the time. I mean, this is the day before Minis were cool, and I'm 6'3". I don't fit in a Mini. And so I got a blanket. My mom gave me a blanket. I put it on the ground. I put my toys on there, and I sold the lot for. I doubled up. I sold a lot for £30. And I went back the next week. I bought £25 of the toys. Paid my £5 through the window. My mum gave me credit on board because she could see I was doing something, and I sold the lot for £50. And I built up and up over a period of several weeks until I got enough stock to cover a market stall. And then I started doing markets and Sunday markets. And I was 17 years old. My nickname was Pete the Toy Boy. Probably wouldn't work today, to be fair. And but I remember I left my dad in June, and by October I'd made my first 1,000. And it was a big deal for me because I'd made it, I'd not earned it. And there was a massive difference in my mind, because I thought, well, in that case, that's my toolbox. And no one can take that away from me. Yeah. And I made 2 important distinctions at that point, which I think are relevant to wrap up the story. One is the fact that I realized that if I was to sell my toys on the market, the mood that I was in would always reflect in the revenue that I would generate. And it took me a little while to correlate that, but I started noticing if I was upset or down or what have you, I'd sell less. If I was in an upbeat mood, I'd sell more. And I was selling the same toys to the same demographic at the same price point. Those variables didn't change. The only variable that changed that made an impact was me. And that got me curious. And at the same time, you've heard the old saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. I got introduced into personal development, personal growth. And for me, it was like, whoa, you mean there's an industry that actually teaches success? Wow, where was that in school? Because that's what I wanted to learn. Not algebra, not the periodic table. Right? And for me, it was like school, in my world, at my time, taught you 2 things. It taught you how to pass tests and work for somebody else. And neither of those were on my long-term agenda. And I also realized, I realized that if I was to take a job, Danny, that let's even say back then I was making $500 a week, which was massive wages in the 80s for a young kid. Obviously, I wouldn't be expecting that. But even if it was $500 a week, by definition, I'd be paid less than what I'm worth. Because if I'm being paid $500 a week, the job has to be worth more. Otherwise, there's nothing in it for the business owner. Yeah. So the very definition of taking a job means I'm settling for less than what I'm worth. And that didn't sit well with me, which is why the whole entrepreneur aspect came in. Anyway, I got into personal growth, and what I learned from that, and it's 30 years this year that I've been essentially unemployable. And yet for 3 decades this year, as a keen student of human behavior and as an active entrepreneur, I mean, I've probably started 26 companies now from scratch. One of them I bought, but 26 companies I've started from scratch. Some have failed majestically, some have wiped me out. Some have been global success stories, and pretty much everything in between. Some of them should have stayed ideas when I was drunk, to be fair. But everything else has been a ride. And I've mirrored that with 30 years of entrepreneurship and 30 years of personal growth. And it's been a fascinating ride. It really has. And recently I've got far more into teaching. I got into teaching and coaching because I was tired of giving free advice way back. Yeah. But now I see myself as a teacher and educator first and kind of an entrepreneur second. And that's been a recent shift for me. I've always been an entrepreneur first and a speaker on the side. But now I'm just passionate about helping people.
Yeah. Fantastic. So I think I would like to raise today is about moving from adversity to your advantage, turning adversity to your advantage, is what you talked about in your book, The Inside Track, which is just right behind you as well. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a very opportune time, given where we are now in history. People are living in a lot of fear of losing their jobs, fear of losing their livelihood, their health, their loved ones. So there's a lot of fear mongering going on. Well, some of them is founded, some of them probably isn't. And so I just like you to shed some light on this. When you look at turning adversity to your advantage, what are the key things, what are the key advice you would like to share with people here, especially in this current situation, to help them move forward, to help them see this differently? Because I know you've had a lot of, in your book, there's so much information, and it would be great if you could share that.
And I'll give some context to that later, I'm sure, as well. Yeah. Where do you start? One of the first things to understand is that outer world follows inner world. Your experience of life is subjective. The objective world plays a role, but it is a secondary role to your experience of that. And one of the ways to immediately clarify that is that there is a huge difference between fear and danger. And most people mix the two. See, fear is mind created. Danger is a real or perceived threat from something externally that you have to deal with. But fear is very different. Again, hence the whole concept, 2 men sat behind prison bars, one saw mud, the other saw stars. Mm-hmm. Your environment does not define you. Case closed. It only gives you the opportunity to define yourself. And the problem is when you buy into the mainstream narrative and fear-mongering right now, you are not leading your own agenda. You are being led on an agenda. And if you get sucked into that vicariously or just caught up in the, what I call most people are sleeping awake, then don't expect a huge amount of positive to come out of that, because it doesn't have your best interests at heart. The mainstream media doesn't wake up in the morning and say, right, how can we try to help people fulfill their potential? That's not their agenda. Their agenda is very simple. I can sum it up with 2 words: eyes on. They're not a charity. They're a business model in a cutthroat space where there's a zillion things vying for people's attention. And the best way to get your attention, to justify viewing figures, to get rate card, which if you're a commercial entity means you'll go bankrupt if you don't. And if you're a public entity means you'll get fired from your position as chairman or CEO if you don't compete in the marketplace. Then the way to do that is to stimulate a part of the brain called the amygdala, which is evolutionarily designed to notice negative before positive. Because you walk past a tree 10,000 years ago and you miss an apple, no big deal. You miss a snake, potentially big deal. So you have a part of your brain that's constantly scanning for perceived threat, and that gets a pass to the front of the line in your conscious awareness. That's why you can notice the brake lights of the car in front of you, even though you've been sleeping awake driving. So from that perspective, the media's job is to engineer access to your amygdala, and they do that through fear. Fear is the fastest way. So, yeah, you need to be able to understand that as human beings, we are programmable by design. You do not get to vote on whether or not you're programmable. You do get to vote on how you are programmed. That much we do have a large measure of control over. Yeah. And I'll give you a classic example, been studied many times. If you take a doctor who is, for example, seeing a patient, and let's say he diagnoses depression. Don't get me started on the mismanagement of imagination around what causes depression and then the biochemical patterning that happens as a result. It's very easy to break once you understand you don't need moderated biochemistry through drugs. But that aside, let's say he's diagnosed with depression. He can prescribe one of 3 drugs, all of which essentially do the same thing. Now, he is under the illusion at that point that he has free will to choose which one to prescribe. With me so far?
Yeah.
Okay. But he also has a coffee mug and a Post-it note and a pen with one of those 3's logos on. Which one do you think he's more likely to prescribe? Under the illusion of free will. Well, we now know 2/3 of the time it'll be the one that he's been unconsciously exposed to and just isn't even aware of it. So yeah, we know that that level of subliminal programming or overt programming is completely engaged 24/7. We're human beings. We adapt and take note of our environment largely at an unconscious level.
True.
So one of the first things in this current environment is to set yourself up to win. If you are an alcoholic and you're trying to battle that, don't have a house full of wine and beer and spirits. It's not going to set you up to win. Yeah, remove it from the house. If you're trying to be positive and look for the best aspect of how you can turn this situation around right now, don't set yourself up to lose by having a room full of negativity blaring at you out of the electronic income reducer, also known as a television, right? Or a news app or whatever. So, the first step is to cut the level of programming that doesn't serve you. A huge part. Otherwise, you're swimming upstream.
Right.
Second thing is to start asking better questions. Questions are the steering wheel of the mind. If you ask a lousy question, you're going to get a lousy answer. Most people aren't trained in asking anything other than lousy questions. And one of the reasons for that is because one needs to understand what the primary role of the mind is, or one of the primary roles of the mind. It's very simple. It is to justify your actions and behavior to be in alignment with your current emotional state. I'll give you an example.
Right.
Let's say you wake up and you're tired. Its job is to find the perfect rational excuse as to why it's okay to press the snooze button. Now, whether you act on that or not is down to a whole different set of values or external, internal motivators. But the mind will find the right excuse. Yeah. If you're angry, it will find the perfect reason why you shouldn't apologize. Why it's okay to blame somebody else. You get my point. The mind's role is to justify, and it is damn good at it.
It's also the ego.
Well, ego, again, you could run off on a 2-hour tangent on ego. You take Ryan's book, for example, Ryan Holiday, Ego is the Enemy. Ego isn't the enemy. Ego is a natural part of the human psyche that we evolved with as a primary defense mechanism. Yeah, because prior to having high levels of consciousness as developed human beings, coming through the level of evolution, ego was very much attuned to self-survival.
Correct.
Now we're kind of growing out as a species. We're moving across that threshold of egocentrism into ethnocentrism, where we now learn how to get along and cooperate. Why? Well, very simple. If you want me to just give a quick example, and this will get some people thinking, what is the purpose of life? Let's make it a light conversation, shall we? All right. What's the purpose of life? Well, let's go to evolution. I don't want to get into too much theology, philosophy, etc., because everybody's got different models of the world that can clash, and mind will justify why they think theirs is right. So if we go to evolution, let's just keep it observational here. 400 million years of fossil records teach us one thing pretty evidently, that the destination, the journey, the trajectory of life is constantly evolving into higher levels of complexity. To use scientific terms, lower entropy, lower disorder and chaos. So if you take an amoeba, for example, a single cell organism, versus a human body, which is about 50 trillion cells, give or take. Some people probably could do with losing a few. But when it comes to, you take 50 trillion amoebas and one food source, what do you have? Well, war. Pretty much, right? As go see a flock of hyenas on one kill. Yeah, you get the point. So if you take 50 trillion cells in a human body in one food source, you don't have war. You don't see the liver and the spleen ganging up against the heart and the kidneys to try to fight for who gets more hemoglobin. That doesn't work. So in order for evolution to execute, you need one primary concept: cooperation. Without cooperation, the human body becomes a war zone. That's what's required. Now, if you extrapolate cooperation out to its logical conclusion, I assert you hit the word love. And ultimately, evolution is about becoming more loving and less fearful. Becoming more focused on other, less focused on self.
Yeah.
Learning how to cooperate instead of compete. Now, again, it's a journey through that. But from our perspective, ego is simply a carryover of previous times of evolution that we still have that jumps up and becomes self-serving. And it's only our personal journey of evolution to grow through that on what I call emotional maturity. All right, does that make sense?
Yeah. Go ahead.
And let's talk about emotional maturity for a second, because one thing I'd like to explain to people here is that there is a massive difference between age, intelligence, and emotional maturity. Those three are not correlated.
Yeah.
You can see patterns, but they are not correlated. There's a lot of emotional teenagers right now running around in very adult bodies. Have you noticed? There are a lot of very intelligent people that are not high conscious. Have you noticed?
Yeah.
And Hitler was a very intelligent guy. Just not high conscious. So those three things one has to unhook from our expectations or projections onto others as to how we think they should be, because you're old enough, you should know better. Doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Right? Levels of consciousness are primary. Now, when I say levels of consciousness, I want to give a quick framework here, because the word consciousness itself is somewhat nebulous. People can get lost down rabbit holes. So let me bring a practical application to this. And it'll also see how the journey to what I call emotional maturity and how to profit or benefit, or at least not get taken out of the game in times of crisis, can tie together. Because on one side of the spectrum, let's go on the scientific side, and basically all science is the essentially the unpacking of the rule sets of the physical world. We live in a physical, rules-based universe in terms of physical matter reality. And our three primary sciences are physics, chemistry, and biology. Physics dealing with particles, chemistry dealing with molecules, and biology dealing with cells. And we, through reverse observation and figuring it out, have managed to identify the rule sets of those sciences to such a degree we can put somebody in orbit, or we can repair a human body. That's great. But consciousness is not part of physical matter reality. It is part, and I call physical matter reality a subset of something more fundamental. We know that. And we know there are so many things that subset cannot answer, which is why Einstein spent the vast third of his life trying to find a grand unifying theory, and he couldn't do it because he was focused on the subset rather than chunking up to the superset. Right. 7 months before he died, he essentially acknowledged that. He said you have to find a way to separate space-time, but he doesn't have the first clue where to start. Right? We've now moved on from that because we have far more levels of understanding around digital physics to be able to bring that to the table. But without getting too down a rabbit hole, on one side, on the sciences, they reduce consciousness to a byproduct of brain function because they have to try to bring it into the subset. Now, the brain doesn't produce consciousness. Never has, never will. You'll never validate that. There's not one study that will. It can't. The brain doesn't produce consciousness any more than a television produces programs, or a radio produces music. Right? It's just not where we're at. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, you have the esoteric, consciousness, part of the divine. Let's all sit around the campfire, hold hands and sing Kumbaya. And a lot of people on the left brain have an issue with that because it's too nebulous. So I want to bring a practical model in here. And if you have a challenge with the word consciousness, just replace it with the word awareness if you're struggling with that. But I tend to chunk it into 4 different levels, if you like, again, from emotional, or you could even call it spiritual maturity. The lowest level of consciousness is what I call to me. And it's the classic victim-based mentality. It's, oh, my life would work. You know, I would have the job that I want. I would have the partner I want, but everything happens to me. And I'm sure we've either been there or know people that have been at some point, because yeah, it's the classic mantra of the victim. Yeah. Nowhere in life is it rewarded, certainly long term. You may get some short, intermittent hits on the narcissistic crack pipe of life, but essentially being a victim is not rewarded. So to me sucks. The only time it feels good when you're in to me is when you're with other people in to me and you kind of have some sort of solidarity in victimhood.
Right. So what you're saying is life is happening to me.
Correct.
That's why we are under victim consciousness. And right now, when we look at the world, I think a large majority of people are in that situation, which is why there is so much of, panic and fear that's stirred up.
Second law of thermodynamics. Yeah, you will naturally, unless you're working on yourself, you will naturally descend into more disorder.
Yeah.
So right now, if you're caught up with mainstream media narrative, if you're hanging around with people, again, peer group is another thing I'll cover. You know, if you hang around with 10 recreational drug users, chances are you're going to become the 11th. You hang around with 10 positive, motivated people that are looking at life through how I can, not why I can't, chances are you'll be the 11th. It's the law of conformity. You can't sidestep it. We're here to adapt to our environment that way. It's part of the program. Yeah. But to me, level of consciousness is a sucky place to be. So then we move to the next level, which is what I call by me. By me is, I know that life doesn't owe me a living. I know that if I do want to get the goals that I want and the car that I want or the life that I want, then I've got to take action because it's going to happen by me. And you move from the victim level of consciousness into the achiever level of consciousness, which is a great step on the evolutionary ladder of self.
Yeah.
It's also very exhausting. Yeah, it's tough. You've got to elbow your way through the crowd. That there's so much that you have to essentially deal with, and it's a constant battle. It's the classic entrepreneur, sort of route that most people go through. But it's still far better and more rewarding than to me.
Yeah.
But there's another 2 levels. The next level we come to is what I call through me. Through me is where, excuse me. Hey, look at that. Quick, virus. Through me is where life is happening through you. And there's a lot more what we call synchronicity. See, if something happened once, it's an incident. If it happens twice, it's a coincidence. If it happens more than twice, there's a pattern to it. Yeah, you can pretty much go to chaos theory, pretty much look at the fact there's an underlying rule set. Just because it's hidden from our left brain doesn't mean to say it doesn't exist. But when you get into a certain state of flow, athletes will talk about this, where you are bypassing conscious thought. You are just acting through some level of intuition, gut instinct, reflex, and that everything's just coming together. Yeah, when we get into gambling, you see a lot of initial what we call beginner's luck, because they have the fear suspension. Right? It's like, because it's novel, it's new, it's what have you. Then all of a sudden they start winning, and it's like now you have fear coming in, fear about what they can lose or fear about other stuff. And now you get on a whole different path. But through me is that place where instead of making 50 sales calls to get a deal, you happen to bump into somebody in a lineup in Starbucks, get chatting, and next minute they become a 50 order customer. Yeah, there's a synchronicity aspect to it.
So that's higher consciousness.
Say again?
That's much higher consciousness than levels 1 and 2.
Yes, exactly. You're starting to move into power instead of force.
Correct.
And then at the highest level, I have what I call ASME. ASME is where all the spiritual masters arrived at and taught from. And it's essentially where you recognize yourself in everything. Yeah, it's essentially non-duality. I see myself in you. I see myself in the tree. I see myself in the floor. It's like there's no separation. So question is, what do you have to do to move through the levels? And this is a kind of a speed overview here, but very simple. Keep it nice and easy. To go from to me, victim mode, into by me, achiever mode, first thing you got to give up, and the first thing you got to replace it with. First thing you need to give up is blame. Blame does not work in any kind of form or shape whatsoever. Blame is not rewarded long-term at any level. Avoiding what it needs to be replaced with, which is personal responsibility, is never going to be a custodian of your own growth. So when you can start giving up blame and taking personal responsibility, you can move out of to me and into by me. You can move out of victim into achiever. That's the pathway predominantly. Now to go from by me to through me, what do you got to give up? What do you got to replace it with? Well, the first thing you really need to give up, and this is where most of the entrepreneurs freak out, you have to give up the need for control. And notice I said the need for control, not control itself.
Yeah. But
you move your center of gravity from forced control to observation and allowing. It's a very different method. You come to a place of acceptance versus resistance. And not from low conscious. And to me, acceptance is victimhood, suppression, being apathy, acquiescing to a more dominant force. That's not what I'm talking about. Acceptance is exceptionally powerful. Yeah. If you spill the milk on the carpet, resisting that is stupid. Complaining at anything that has already happened, in all fairness, is stupid. Why? Because you can't do anything about it. In the domain of time, it may as well have happened 1,000,000 years ago as opposed to a second ago. It's the same thing. It's gone. It's done. So resisting what's already happened is one of the worst things. People spend a lot of time into me by getting stuck in the past or stuff that happened. I just lost my job. I'm upset. Right? Coming to a place of acceptance can be exceptionally powerful because, okay, this is what's happened. Can't change what's happened. And you free up the energy of resistance and channel it now into what's the next best move that I can take. Okay, it's a brand new carpet. The milk spilt. Can't argue with that now. Okay, let's use the energy of complaining, crying, and bitching about it to put into going to get a mop. Simple example, but you get the point. Okay, so giving up the need for control. What do you replace that with? Trust, faith, knowing. Yeah. They're different stair steps on the ladder. About what? Something that's more intelligent than you. And this comes back to Einstein, who said that the greatest question a person being can ask or answer in their lifetime is whether they live in a friendly or a hostile universe. Now think about it for a second. To me, hostile universe. Why? Because it's inherently fear-based. You're looking through the lens of it's happening to me, it's separate from, and you're always going to be looking through a fear-based lens. But if you think that you live in a friendly universe, so I'm an inverse paranoid, have been for years. I'm totally convinced that the universe is involved in a secret and hidden conspiracy to make me happy and successful.
That's good to have.
It works for me. But if you live in a friendly universe, you can chunk up out of the detail of what's happening in the scene of your movie and start getting more associated to the script of your movie. And being able to understand that there is a higher level of intelligence that is running this game. Now, I don't want to get into labels because historically, certainly the 3-letter label that a lot of people use is what's, we've quite often gone to war and killed each other over as to whose version of that label is right. So I've got no interest in labels. But acknowledgement of something that's smarter than me is fairly evident because I don't have to set an alarm for 3 a.m. to remind myself to beat my heart. Something smarter than me is doing that. And there's a rule set that's, let's say, very, very smart. So if I live in a friendly universe and it was created to be a custodian of my growth at some level, then I can far easier move out of the need for trying to control everything from a fear-based reality and move into far more of a flow state. And then we have ASME. ASME is a case of, to get out of through me into ASME, what do you have to give up? The illusion of separateness. What do you replace it with? Unconditional love. It's pretty simple. Again, every teacher taught that. Well, to be fair, Jesus was teaching unconditional love. The Buddha was teaching self-enlightenment, but the pathways and distinctions slightly different. But when it comes to understanding levels of consciousness, it's part of a framework. And again, this is just a model. Please understand that models are only useful to the extent that you can get some practical benefit from them. Don't confuse the map with the actual territory. right? But as third dimensional conceptual beings trying to project onto an experience of life so we can make some understanding of it, models can be useful. But don't take it as fact. Yes, it's just to try to help us navigate what is essentially a non-linear concept through a linear-based projection. For example, the flat Earth model works very well when you're designing a building, but it doesn't work very well when you're planning a geodesic flight path from Hong Kong to London. So everything has its place. But if you want to start moving forward and being empowered by adversity, being empowered by crisis, being empowered by what's going on right now, one has to divorce oneself to some extent from the drama and detail of what you perceive is going on in the outer world and retake control of what's going on in your inner world.
All right. So get out of current reality and get more in touch with yourself.
Again, be careful of the labels. Current reality, no, there is only your reality. That's it. And when, this is not the time, place to jump into the digital physics rabbit hole, but we now pretty much know that this is a virtual-based reality. And what we're experiencing as consciousness is a holographic simulation that we're all playing a giant multiplayer game. But don't get me started on the quantum mechanics on that. We'll be here all day. Won't serve. Point being is that if we take in charge of our inner world relationship to what we perceive is going on in the outer world, or if you want to follow the model, the data stream that we're getting called our sense data, then the journey to emotional maturity is something you can't ignore. And there are two real good starting points on that. The first real key defining moment for most people in the journey to emotional maturity is that the day they finally become okay not being liked. Ooh, and that's a tough one for some people. We live in a world, Danny, unfortunately, where there are still millions and millions of people and adults running around trying to look for somewhere to replug in their umbilical cord to try to get love, connection, validation, approval, acceptance, all of that stuff. Because they're driven a lot by what I call goop. The good opinion of other people. And you cannot be authentic when you're swimming in goop, because you're always adapting who you believe you should be to fit the approval strategies of what you perceive other people have. And there's no room for authenticity there. You become this giant chameleon. If they don't like me this way, I'll be that way. If they can't realize your own truth through that. So becoming okay not being liked is the first step. Don't take it personally if somebody doesn't like you. Have you noticed most people are struggling to like themselves? Right? It's just a projection of their model of the world onto you. And the way to handle that, two ways. One is to understand that everybody else's opinion of you is none of your business. And when you own that, you can start moving into what I call understand the movie metaphor a lot more. And this is where I'm going to start getting really, try to give you some real empowering frames. Because I believe we all star as the star of the movie of our life. I'm pretty convinced of that because each of you are starring in the movie of your life. Why do I know that? Because you're the only one that's in every single scene of the movie of your life. Now, you may have at best a handful of supporting cast. Wife, spouse, sibling, boss, partner, whatever. The vast, vast majority of people that enter your movie are nothing more than film extras. What do I mean by that? It means that when they're not in your scene, you're no longer thinking of them. When they walk off set in the scene of the movie of your life, you're no longer thinking of them. Now, here's the challenge. Because we walk around as the star of our movie, we misperceive the fact that we think everybody else sees us as the star of our movie. But of course they don't, because guess what? They're starring in a film as well. They're starring in their own movie. Which means, by definition, we will either be at best a supporting cast, but 99% of people in our world that walk into our scene, that we interact with in our lifetime are nothing more, we are nothing more than film extras in their movie. Now, when you realize that, you come to a fundamental truth, which is this. Most people don't care enough about you to bother to give an opinion. Why? Because they're being too busy being worried about what they think you're thinking of them. because they think we see them as the star of the movie. And when you wake up from that, it's a lot easier to let go of goop. And then you can start becoming okay not being liked because you're the star of your movie. It's not about trying to, say, replug in your umbilical cord. And you can move on to the next, or the second, or the other key point on the journey of emotional maturity, and that is this. It's the day where you transition from thinking that life is a comfort-centric experience into the realization and truth that life is a growth-centric experience. And we've been largely conditioned through 21st and 20th century reality into the illusion of it being a comfort-centric experience. It's what drives a lot of our goals. It's what drives most of our consumer-based economy on trying to sell things that make it easier, cheaper, faster, more comfortable, and take away the effort that is largely required. Now, if we want to become the best version of ourselves, let's use the physical rule set as a parallel. You go to the gym. How do you grow? You lift the weights. You don't walk into the gym and say, hey, listen, you give me the strength, I'll go lift the weights. That doesn't work. That's like sitting in front of the fire saying, hey, listen, give me some heat, I'll go fetch you some fuel. That's how most people in Toomey live their life, by the way. That doesn't work. So no, we know we have to grow and contribute. That are the two laws of nature. Don't believe me? Look out of the window. Everything in nature grows and contributes, or it's taken out of the food chain. We just think we're different. So again, how do you grow? Through challenge. Ask your muscles. But if you think you live in a comfort-centric experience and challenge shows up, if your personal trainer comes in the gym and you don't know you're an athlete, you're going to hide behind the weight stack. You're going to complain when you're on the treadmill. And you're going to do the minimum amount to try to tick the box that's required. You're going to talk about him behind his back or her back. You get the idea. There's a resistance-based mentality, total antithesis of acceptance. Now, when you understand you're an athlete and you are excited about training for the Olympic gold, you see your workouts from a very different perspective. Now, if you're not throwing up in 30 minutes, you want your money back, right? You're working with the personal trainer. You're pushing. You feel proud that you can't lift that last bar and you try to bust it out and you can't raise your arms for about another day, right? There's a sense of self-esteem that's linked to that. So if we take our current perception of reality and we understand that we're kind of in the earth gym, we're in earth school, we're here to learn how to grow up. That's what evolution teaches us, how to learn how to become more loving instead of more fearful in ever more challenging circumstances. Because once you pass grade 6, what do? You go to grade 7. Are the questions harder? Well, yeah, they're meant to be. If you fail grade 6, you're going to get the same exam. Different questions, but the same exam, same level until you pass, which is why many people have the same relationship with different people. Because, if everybody you meet's an idiot, maybe it's not them.
There's a question here, Peter, someone saying that since you've talked about levels of consciousness, to me, by me, through me, as me, so does it also go in reverse order? So if someone's had gone to the through me level, can they also reverse back into to me?
Great question. There's a difference between a state of consciousness, which is somewhat mood dependent, and a stage of consciousness, which is kind of where you are. Because we're human beings, we're designed to experience a whole range of different emotional states. The whole illusion of the pursuit of happiness is a fruitless chase. Happiness is just one type of emotion. Joy is different, but chasing happiness, which is essentially short-term levels of dopamine and serotonin hits, is not the game here. So I didn't want to be happy at my mother's funeral, but there was a big difference between being happy and being fulfilled. I was fulfilled. I had to go into grief. Grief is a lower level of consciousness, but it's okay when you use it as a cathartic-based experience. But some people can get stuck there for a lifetime. So you have states of consciousness. We're all, I'm sure, pretty high conscious, reasonable people because they've been attracted to this level of call today.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't have a lot of to-me people kind of showing up to look how to better themselves. So if you understand that there's times where we get angry or we get hooked or we get provoked or we do things we're not proud of, that's okay. We usually come back to our base, our stage of consciousness. But we can bounce up and down.
Sure.
We can have moments of unconditional love and enlightenment. We can have moments of depression or anger. It's we bounce around, but we have a particular home. Where do you live? Where do you visit? Is kind of the way to frame that. Now, if you visit too often, you'll start living there. Right? So it's possible to be in one level of consciousness in one part of your life, like in business, you might be in by me, and in health, you might be in to me. But it offers a framework of understanding on how to navigate.
Correct.
And put one foot in front of the other.
What I find really useful is that when you experience through me and when you find yourself for a particular moment of time in to me as victim, you don't like it. You say, I want to go back. And you always find that uncomfortable being a victim again. So because you've already experienced a higher level of consciousness, you're more drawn towards it. So
it depends on your stage, in all fairness, because
at least you've got the taste of what really works for you, what makes you feel good about it.
Correct. And for someone like yourself, Danny, that makes total sense. But there's two aspects there to be observant of. One is what I call secondary gain. There's a lot of people that get secondary gain from behaviors that don't serve them. So when I'm working with drug addicts or homeless, abuse cases, trauma, suicide, well, let's take people with significant problems. One of the first questions I ask, especially with drug addicts, is who are you without your problem? Because most people are so identified with it, there's only so many needs that you can have, and most people are getting secondary gain. So being a drug addict feels like crap. They may have been tired of losing relationships and people and waking up in their own vomit and all of that, and they want to change. But what do they get from that problem? Significance. I don't have an education. I don't have any money, but I have a significant problem. I get connection. Everybody's running around trying to help me or make excuses for me or hold a space for me or what have you. Without my problem, that goes away. And this is why the rehab yo-yo is so prevalent, because they cure the biochemical physical addiction, but they don't replace the needs that were being met through that addiction. Correct. The secondary gain. So that's one aspect that can keep people further down. But the other thing is the rumble strip. You see, the rumble strip of life is always operating. And this is a revelation for people when they understand it. If you're driving down the highway, and I was in Hong Kong recently, in fact, in January, and I've got a business in Hong Kong, and I was giving some talks in Hong Kong. In fact, for those familiar with EO, the Entrepreneurs Organization, I spoke with the EO chapter last year as well. I was a 10-year member of EO. And so if you drive down the highway in Hong Kong, same as anywhere else, on the freeways, you have rumble strips, which means that if you go over too far and you're not paying attention because you're sleeping awake like most people are, it wakes you up. It's designed to get your attention. Say, oi, dummy, you're going off track. Get to the center of the road. Okay, that's good. Serves a good purpose. Life has a similar rumble strip. Let's use health as an example. You're driving down the road and you're kind of just meandering around. You're having cheeseburgers instead of salads. You're not really doing exercise. You're too busy. And then at one point you hit the rumble strip. You get short of breath and you get dizzy, lightheaded, and you get out of breath going upstairs or playing football with your grandson or whatever it may be. It's like, whew, slight pain in the chest there. Rumble strip. The feedback principle. Well, guess what? What do most people do? I was enjoying driving, weaving down the road, listening to my music, and now all of a sudden this rumble strip comes along and it's interfering with my music. What do? They want to go to the doctor and take a pill. In other words, they want to turn the volume of the music up. They're not looking at what's happening, why the rumble strip's there. Oh, the oil light's flashing. What do I do about it? It's annoying. That's okay. I get a pair of wire cutters and I snip the wire to the oil light. There you go. Problem solved. Right? Same mentality. So the rumble strip is there. Now, the rumble strip, depression. Let's look at that. Depression is the rumble strip. You're out of sync. You're too focused on yourself. You haven't got a compelling future. You've not sat down and asked yourself better questions. It's like the human body's like a bicycle. If it's not moving towards something with purpose, it'll lose its equilibrium and fall over. And what shows up? Uncertainty, doubt, confusion, poor self-talk, depression. See, depression is nothing more than the outer world doesn't fit the pictures of what I think it should look like based on my inner world rules, values, and projections. That's it. And then it becomes biochemical. Then it becomes chronic because we get into a thought pattern. Every thought produces a chemical, neuropeptide hormone, that alters the body chemistry. And that body chemistry then affects the cells. The cells switch their receptor sites to get used to that level of inner environment. And now if you think positive for 3 seconds, the cell goes, hang on a minute. We're not changing our shape to get back into that chemistry when it's easier for you to change your mind than 50 trillion cells to change their receptor sites. So now you start doubting again. It becomes chronic because thoughts are habitual based on the addictions from the cells to the biochemistry. Make sense? Yeah. So rumble strip and secondary gain are two things you want to look at on there. Now, again, I don't know how long we've got, but I'm happy to sort of bring this full circle into making it practical a little more.
Come up, you mentioned everybody's opinion is none of your business. Could you elaborate on that? What that means? There's a question in the group. Yeah.
Everybody's projecting from their own model of the world. Yeah. That's one of the first things to understand. No two people see the same thing. No two people hear the same thing. I'll demonstrate. To make use of our outer world, all of the information that comes into us has to first pass through one of the 5 physical senses. Sense data. Sight, touch, smell, taste, and hearing. So all of us have the same equipment called the 5 senses. So you take 2 people standing next to each other. Now, if we all use the 5 senses, question, how many of us all like the same food? Oh, we've got a variable.
Yeah.
Well, that screws it up. How many of us all like the same music? How many of us like the same sense of smell, have the same sense of what we like to smell? That's why there's so many different aftershaves and perfumes. Right? You get it. How many of us all have the same favorite color? You get the idea. So you can have 2 people standing next to each other, side by side, to experience the exact same event in the outer world, in the same moment in time, breathing the same air. Use the same equipment to process that data, called the 5 senses, and come up with an entirely different conclusion as to what it means. Now, of course, the emotionally mature question is, who's right? And the emotionally immature answer to that question is, I am. Because, we justify our own model of the world. Now, when you understand that everybody is seeing the world through their own looking glasses, processing through their own internal mechanisms, and we haven't even talked about childhood, cultural upbringing, significant emotional events, trauma, life experience, all of that stuff that people draw different conclusions with, and they will see the world. So if somebody has an opinion of you and comes up and says, I think you're an idiot. Now, if you're in a victim mentality and you're at a low level, you're going to use that as reinforcement of low self-esteem. If you're calibrating at anger, you're going to retaliate. If you're calibrating at reason, you're going to start to look at things and say, oh, I wonder why he said that. Is there something I'm doing that's not right? I mean, let me take a look. You're going to have to be self-reflective, but not from a critical victim place.
Correct.
If you come from unconditional love, you're going to look at somebody with a huge amount of compassion, thinking, wow, how much pain is this person in that they've got to walk around projecting their own anger and insecurities at other people? Let's hold a space to this guy and say, look, see, you're not making it about you.
Correct.
As I said, most people are struggling to like themselves. Don't take it personally if they don't like you. That's why I said everybody else's opinion of me is none of my business.
All right, that's great. That's good. So if we just kind of summarize, given the current situation we are in right now, where there's a lot of fear, and some of it is, in a way, people are worried about their livelihoods, they run families, etc. So I think from what you said is being aware of the 4 stages of consciousness, absolutely moving out of victim consciousness into creation mode, into, accepting mode, accepting what the current situation is. How can I step out of it? How can I treat this as an opportunity and treat this to my advantage, as opposed to get muddled into the media, the frenzy and the panic that's going on. That's a good way of talking about it. That's great. What do you see as the new normal coming out of this? Because I don't think we are out of the woods now. Whether this is a manufactured, thing that's happening in the world, or whether it's a divine awakening, that's a different question. But what do you see as the normal, as the new normal that's going to come out of it from a business perspective, and just normal daily life perspective? What's your take on that?
I think rather than try to get into the local detail of it, which there's too much uncertainty around.
Yeah.
Let's chunk up for a second. I remember on my New Year's Day video that I put out to my fan base, people asking, okay, what's 2020 going to hold? Because I don't think anybody knew at that point.
Yeah.
But I gave a prediction, and I think you see how it stacks up. I said, I've got a pretty decent crystal ball, and I'm pretty certain I know what 2020 is going to hold. Yeah. Why? Because I know what last year is going to hold. In fact, I know what the next 5 years is going to hold, because I know what the last 5 years has held, and the last 5,000 years, and the next 5,000 years. Two things: challenge and opportunity. That's it.
Yeah.
When you understand that is an inherent part of the game, challenge and opportunity. Remember, change is the only constant.
Correct.
So a far better, rather than say, oh, how do I try to preempt or deal with all this stuff that's happening? That's a fool's game. It's far better to build a different kind of muscle.
Yeah.
And this is the muscle that will make you an example for your family right now. It is the muscle that'll make you more valuable in the marketplace right now. It's the muscle that'll keep you sane right now. And that is building the muscle of the ability to handle uncertainty.
Yeah.
It's the entrepreneur's number one go-to. Because there's no certainty in life. I think most people have just realized, the biggest benefit that's come out of this global situation is people have woken up to the fact that there's no certainty. The illusion of certainty is what keeps people from growing and sticks them in a comfort zone. Again, there's a lot of people going to win out of this, and that has far more to do with your mindset than your circumstances. If you're in a victim mentality, you will attract the outer world justification and presentation of what justifies you being a victim. If you're an opportunist right now, and if you're looking to really support people, and that'd be the first thing I say, take the attention off yourself and think of, what can I do to contribute here? How can I step up?
Correct. Because
you've got a once in a lifetime opportunity here to show your kids, your spouse, your community, your friends, what it's like to be calm under pressure, what it's like to be the example of turning off the fear-based narrative bullshit and coming from a place of, no, I'm the star of my movie. I'm not going to get sucked in as an unpaid film extra in the big budget Corona movie, because that's a pretty poor acting career choice. I still get to choose my reality. And if that means that I've been fired, then I celebrate that outcome. Why? Because life is non-linear. Two men sat behind prison bars, one saw mud, the other saw stars. Right? So if we know that the river of life is constantly winding, we know that. There's no straight lines in nature. You see a straight line, it's man-made. If you're resisting the bends, you're wasting your energy. Learning how to sail with the bends usually ends up at a decent result, because I think we can all come to several examples in our life where we were involved in something that we thought was traumatic, or we had our certainty blanket pulled, or something didn't fit our pictures at the time in a big way. And 6 months later, we look back and think, wow, well, thank goodness that happened. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this now.
So talking about that, Peter, I remember you'd mentioned in your book, you're one of the non-criminals in prison, and you completely changed the way people view prison life, and you've come out a winner. Could you talk a little bit about that? What did you do when you were in that low point? Now, that's if somebody's in that position, that's real victim consciousness, right? And to rise above that, it takes moral courage, physical courage, and spiritual courage. So can you just shed some light on that?
I'll give a 2-minute backstory so people have context. So when I was in Dubai, I was involved in some business deals with a large major multinational conglomerate, $100 billion company, which I probably won't name as Hewlett Packard. And we did several deals. I bought $12.5 million of the goods, paid for it in full, sold it at a small margin, 1-2%. IT is very cutthroat. 7 years later, I'm at my home in England. I get a knock on the door with an expensive team of lawyers for HP, suing me for $17 million. I'm like, what? They're like, that's the difference between the wholesale price and the retail price because we didn't know you were going to resell it. I'm like, you're on drugs. Like I'm under no contract that I couldn't resell it. I'm not a distributor. I'm not an authorized reseller. I'm a full title. I can do what I want. Oh, well, yeah, we're going to court. I'm like, it'll never get to court. And it didn't, by the way. They said, but give us $100,000. We'll make it all go away. I'm like, oh, I get it. You're jealous on the money that I made. You want to try and squeeze some of it out for yourself. And yeah, not playing. I'm a classic indigo child, if you're familiar with the term. And so 6 months later, because I wasn't playing ball, they threw a contempt of court application at me saying that I breached the freezing order. I thought, I haven't breached the freezing order. And I looked at the argument. It was intelligent. It was clever, as you could expect from a $100 million law firm. Princess Diana's divorce lawyers, they're pretty ruthless. And so I thought any judge looking at this in his right mind would laugh it out of court. And let's just say I had a lot to learn about how the court process works. So I went in and literally I had 50 staff. We were doing 6 figures a month in revenue and we were changing thousands of lives. This is 3 years ago. And I thought, I've just got to pop into court and get rid of this BS. And they sold it to the judge and he gave me 6 months in prison as the only non-criminal. Never been arrested, never been charged of a crime, never been convicted, still don't have a criminal record. And I was sent to Pentonville, which is a 200-year-old Victorian prison, the most violent prison in the UK. And when it looked like it was going the wrong way, my fiance said, why is this happening? I'm like, well, honey, I don't know, but here's what I do know. 25 years, I've helped a lot of people around the world. Maybe the people I could really help never get to see my work because they're in somewhere like prison. If the universe wants to send me in there in this bend in the river to go help people, let me go do it. Yeah, I see it as a practical field trip. And I never went in with the identity of a prisoner. That would have been victim mode. That would have been to me. I went in, my identity was a secret agent of change. And even the prison doctor, when I had my medical before they gave me a cell, was like, are you undercover? I'm like, why do you ask? I says, you asked to the second person, the person checking me in and getting my clothes asked if I was a policeman. All right. And he says, are you undercover? I said, you're the second person to say that. Why did you say it? He said, 20 years as a prison doctor, I've never ever seen anybody so happy on their first ever day in prison. Anyway, I cut a long story short, I ended up getting a lot of the prisoners off drugs, stopping suicides. I reduced the violence between the wings. I produced that. In fact, I've got a copy here. I see the new prisoner welcome booklet, which is now being used in prisons all over the world, which shifts the psychology of inmates coming in. I won a national award for the work that I was doing. And it became one of the most incredible, awe-inspiring adventures I've ever had the privilege of living. But every 2 weeks, I was running a senior coaching group at the time. I had 100 students in that group. I was halfway through the 6-month program and this happened. And so I wrote to them every 2 weeks, basically showing them what I was doing and everything I've been teaching them, that they were paying me up to $50,000 a year to learn in my master circle group. I was showing them how I was applying it in this situation. And so it became part journal, part how-to manual, part tradecraft, and part you couldn't make it up, but it was real.
Yeah.
And so when I came out after 6 months, 2.5 years ago, they said, wow, we learned more from these 11 letters that you wrote than following you around the world for the last 2 years on stage. You have to publish them. I'm like, well, this was never meant to be a book. This was written as private letters. This is some of the highest level of work that I'm doing in a real environment, showing you how to get out of or turn your life around no matter what happens. Yeah, you lose your business, nearly lost my home, ended up with hundreds of thousands in legal debt. Yeah, I mean, it was just, you couldn't have pulled the blanket any harder. Yeah, my wedding, which was booked for Portofino and paid for, in Italy, like $100,000. Yeah, the groom went AWOL. The groom was locked up. Things people do to get out of marriage. Hey? But yeah, and that virtually cost me the relationship. And so I lost virtually everything. And yeah, to come out of that or to go in smiling automatically, turn it around into an incredible adventure that's helping thousands of lives. And then when we published, I think it went bestseller in 2 hours, Amazon #1 in 4 hours. We sold out 3 suppliers on the first day, sold to 40 countries on the first day. And if you look at any online review, I'm very humbled and pleased to say that it's changed the life of virtually everybody that's ever read the book or listened to it on Audible. And for those interested, I'm happy because I'm giving it away pretty much now for just cover a little bit of the shipping. at getpetesbook.com. That's the only thing I'll share with you today. You can go to Barnes & Noble and buy it for $29.95, or you can get it for $7.95 for shipping off that website. Yeah, and I give you an offer if you want the upsell for the Audible as well. But the book itself is a how-to manual for dealing with exactly what's going on right now. From the very first letter, I break down how do you create an empowering psychology from scratch? What are the key components that go into that? Book 2, I break down how to break out of other people's projections of drama or guilt or anything like that. Yeah, and it's a fascinating story. I sometimes read it back and think, wow, did that really happen? And then at the end of the book, you'll see all of the letters from not just the prisoners, but the prison staff, the officers, the senior officers, even the governors, that were blown away by the movement that I was able to create in there, because at some point, we turned it around. Right. And it was a fascinating read. So you can see that's the book, The Inside Track, and say, please read any of the reviews online and tune in. You'll find out if it's right for you or if you want to listen to it. I'm not here to try to push books. That's not what I'm about. In fact, I lose money on the shipping deal. I just want to help a lot of people right now. So
the other thing is that, every successful person has a mentor or a coach, and I've experienced that myself and coached a number of people as well. So I see the power in it. Who was that one or two people who's really impacted your life?
Great question. You meet different people at different times depending on where you're at. Yeah. A kindergarten student isn't going to listen to a PhD professor. As much as a college professor is going to be able to teach kindergarten. It's you have to meet where you're at. So for me, one of my early mentors that had a profound impact on my psychology was a guy called George Zalicki, who was a legend in the sort of MLM world, the network marketing world. Wow. Not something I spent a lot of time in, but George himself is a absolute stalwart. He's responsible more than Tony Robbins, to be fair. And I worked with Tony for 15 years. I was an experienced trainer for Tony Robbins for a decade and a half. I was around the world.
That must have been an amazing experience.
It was, and it gave me a huge foundation in understanding people's psychology, instant transformation, and human behavior, on top of the other stuff I'd done. But George had a big impact. Tony obviously had an impact. One of my early business mentors is a guy called Dan Pena. For those that probably know Dan, the $1 trillion man. And everything serves a certain point. In my 20s, I was in Buy Me. And I was, I bought my first Ferrari when I was 25 for cash, a big old Testarossa. I was flying Concorde. I was young wonder boy. Inside, completely fearful of not being good enough. It was all to try to cover up insecurities as a young man, to prove to the world that I was finally good enough. Not realizing, A, the world didn't give a crap, because it was too busy starring in its own movie. But an understanding that most people don't care about your problems. In fact, 80% of the people don't care about your problems. The other 20% are glad you have them. Right? So going for the sympathy vote isn't really a good strategy. But I was pushing hard, but I was exhausted. I was working 130 to 133 hours a week, and I fell asleep driving home at 2 a.m. from the office one time and hit an intersection at 60 miles an hour. And that was the starting point on my journey of waking up, because I realized that there had to be another level. Buy Me, I'd mastered Buy Me. I can go, you give me a goal, I'll achieve it. That's not an issue. The problem is why am I still not fulfilled?
Correct.
And that was, again, the opening question, is understanding there's a massive difference between a life-chasing success and a life-chasing fulfillment.
Absolutely. Success
comes from trying to nail the next goal and wonder why you're still not happy. There's no end to that. I thought, when I make my first million, I'll be happy. And guess what? Made my first million, not happy. Oh, I know why. I need 2 million now in case I lose the first. That game doesn't end. I've coached people worth 700 million that are miserable because they're not a billionaire yet. You get the idea.
Yeah. It's a good problem to have.
You'd think. But I've also worked with people in Africa, and I've owned charities in Africa, and I've done all sorts of stuff where you got kids that have got nothing, that have such a joy and level of peace or they're ecstatic because it rained yesterday. Yeah. We have a very different perception depending on our level of consciousness.
Correct. Absolutely. So Peter, one last question. What are the 3 practical things that people can start doing tomorrow that would put them in a different, better, empowered, inspired frame of mind given the situation? What are some practical things that they can start doing immediately?
Right. I was going to say the first thing is to not wait till tomorrow, but I'll give you that as number 0. So to take it away. First thing, as I said, set yourself up to win. All right. It's one thing, learning how to swim. It's another one going upstream against the current. And if you are surrounding yourself right now with evidence or projected evidence from other people's model of the world as to why life doesn't work or why it's hard or why you should be scared, you are swimming upstream. Take control of how you're going to be programmed. There's enough positive stuff out there that isn't in woo-woo land here. Let's put our head in the sand and ignore it. That's not what it's about. If I can walk into prison losing anything and be smiling about this incredible adventure because I trust where the river is going, even though I can't see around the bends, then I've got an inherently different relationship to challenge. All right, and that comes from the second part. Get on to the point where you understand life is a growth-centric experience. See, the strongest trees don't grow in the best soil. They grow in the strongest winds. So if you want to become the best version of yourself, pray for some strong winds and don't bitch about them when they show up. Your personal trainer is your friend here, not your enemy. So that'd be the second thing. Get into the growth-centric mindset.
Yeah.
Third thing, work on the levels of emotional maturity that have far more to do with asking the question, what can I contribute rather than what can I take? When people go fearful and get scared, it's all about self-preservation. It's all about I want. It's all about me, or my immediate family, or whatever it may be. That mindset will cut you off from prosperity, or opportunities. Because when you understand that money, the only place in the universe that money means anything is in the mind of a human. Nothing else, gives it any meaning. It's either pieces of paper with dead people on it, or it's hard rocks or shiny metal. It's pretty much it. If you had 100,000 in cash and you were cold and there was no economy, you'd burn the money to stay warm. It's pretty practical. So when you realize that the only way you get money, and this is why most people don't have enough of it, is to realize that it is a byproduct or a consequence of measuring perceived value. And again, go back to the analogy I gave earlier. You sit in front of the fire, say, give me some fuel, and I'll go, or give me some heat, and I'll go get you some fuel. That doesn't work. Asking for strength before you lift the weights goes against the rule set. Asking for money before you've given value goes against the rule set. So you only get money by offering something of value for it first. And when we get scared, we tend to shut down and we switch the direction of flow from not what can I contribute to what can I get.
Correct.
And we wonder why, not a lot of the stuff we try to do works out. So switching to an ethnocentric example, and that doesn't have to be commercial, right? I'm talking about who you are. What are you doing for other people right now? What are you doing? And it doesn't have to be practical. I don't mean running around to old people delivering food. I'm saying, how are you showing up as the example? Because the only thing we can do in life, Danny, is to become the example and the invitation. That's it. Everyone's starring their own movie. And for some people, it's going to be a drama. Some people, it's going to be a horror film. A lot of people, it's a soap opera, especially right now. You're here to live a passionate adventure. You're here to live a rom-com. Go make it fun. I had so much fun in prison. When the prison guards would ask me, Mr. Sage, how are you doing today? Right? Because they'd all know the answer. And I'd say it with passion. Living the dream. And everyone would laugh, which is the rarest sound you'll ever hear in prison. And I used to whistle on the wing, 2 songs. One was Always Look on the Bright Side of Life, good old Monty Python. And the other was The Great Escape, because it was fun.
Yes. Steve McQueen.
Yeah, exactly. And so, if you come from a place of saying, listen, my job here is to be the best version of me that I can, for whatever that is. And for some people, if you're in to me, that means probably getting into a higher version of to me to cross into by me.
Yeah.
We're not here to be enlightened. If you suddenly wake up enlightened, expect a bus to come along and knock you over because you've graduated Earth School. Time to go to college, wherever that may be. So we're not here to get it perfect. A lot of the times we learn more from the wrong answers we give in class than the right answers. That's okay. Don't judge yourself. It's part of the game. If you didn't have the rumble strip, you'd probably go off the verge. So don't complain at the noise. Am I making sense?
Sorry, I think. Okay. Can you hear me, Peter? Oh, sorry, just a second. I think
I was muted there. There you go. Yeah, I hope that's been useful, guys, or has offered some level of value here.
Does anyone have a question? If you have any more questions, please type it into the box on the right, and I can raise that with Peter. Peter, I've actually learned a lot from this just 1 hour conversation, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to you have as well. This is why, having people like you and the others I've had on the call is so important, because you're able to provide those few enlightening moments that help people to move forward. And I think this is what it is that tomorrow when I wake up, or even after the call, what are the few things I can do to get into the right space? How can I get more grounded? How can I be more centered? And how can I be the best version and actually make this situation, which we all see as adversity, make it win for us? And when a larger population comes with that mindset, you could absolutely do amazing things. And I'm getting some very good feedback from people, Peter. So, thank you very much. I've got a question. Someone says, how did Peter develop his level of positivity and growth centricity? Tools that work for him. My God, that's a long question. Peter, can you make it brief?
Experience and practice.
Well,
I've been in the game 30 years this year. If I can't walk my talk right now, you should never listen to a word I say. That's why I was excited about going to prison, because it gave me an opportunity to test for myself in a real environment. Being on stage is one thing, writing books is one thing, but how do you show up when it's not a drill? Absolutely. And that was great. So for me, it was just practice. I mean, again, having some high level organizing beliefs, like I live in a friendly universe. As an overarching belief system, that alone is enough to carry you through periods of doubt. Because all by me can do is try to fix the set on the scene that you're in your movie. It tries to control the scene and the other actors and the script. Whereas through me is all about trusting the director, trusting the producer. And yes, your job is to show up and act the best you can. But there's so much outside of your control that will always be presented to you in accordance with your perfect next lesson or step.
Excellent.
Fail that, you're going to go back and resit the exam.
All right, thank you, Peter. And what's next for Peter Sage? Anything?
Well, I'm excited. I'm working on my next book at the moment as well. But obviously, I'm passionate about helping people and coaching people and taking them through. I've got a whole load of resources from free to high level if you want that level. So there's something for everybody. I'm just trying to empower people right now that they can become the best versions of themselves and therefore be the example and invitation to others, rather than try to be the imposition, which obviously never works.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. Thank you for your time, Peter. And it's absolutely a privilege and honor to have you here. And I'm receiving some very good comments. And thank you so much, Peter. Thank you very much for being here. If anybody wants to get in touch with Peter, it's www.petersage.com. Is that correct?
Yeah, just go to my website. There's a lot of stuff there. There's some great resources. petersage.com. Yeah, you can find me. I registered that in, I think, 97 on there. So we've been around for a while. But no, it's great. And Danny, thank you for doing what you're doing. Yeah, you're a great example here of somebody that's working hard to promote value for people through your medium and your connections. I'd have never had the opportunity or the privilege to have met the people I've met here today or seen or been able to share some of my stuff with had it not been for you. So, keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. And God bless. Thanks, Peter.